Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, February 20th, 2025. And as you might have guessed, the Nefarium is busy. But anyway, I want to remind everybody that, first of all, in our housekeeping task, we have the vid chat tomorrow afternoon. That will be the evening vid chat, so it'll start at 5 o'clock U.S. Central Time. We're scheduled to end around 8 o'clock. What that means is please get your comments and questions in by 10 o'clock, no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time. And remember, folks, the timestamp on my end is the one that counts. So if you're in doubt, the earlier you get your vid chat questions in, the better, because we take them in order of receipt. And if we run out of time in the 3 hours, we just have to roll it over. We haven't run out of time yet, but there's always that possibility. So please get your comments and questions in no later than 10 U.S. Central Time. Now, there's another bit of happy housekeeping to do. As all of you know, I've been working furiously and at breakneck speed on the sequel to the Rialto in Richmond. I started the actual writing of the book about a little over 2 weeks ago. I started the research while I was doing the Rialto in Richmond Volume 1, and about halfway writing through that, I knew that I was going to have to do a sequel and organize the Rialto in Richmond as kind of a foundation pour if you're in construction. The rest of the edifice is coming. I managed to complete it, and I informed the publisher, which is Adventures Unlimited Press. David Childress has already put and posted the title on his website and on Amazon. So it is now available for pre-order, and I have not even sent the manuscript and all of the stuff off to the publisher. So he's in a hurry to get this out too. So my advice is, if you want to receive your copy faster, you need to pre-order it with Adventures Unlimited Press, not with Amazon, because remember, it takes a while for books to go from the publisher to distributors and then work its way through the Barnes & Noble Amazon distribution system. The title of the sequel, and you will recognize that it was very deliberately intended to be a sequel because the cover art is deliberately very similar to that of the Rialto in Richmond. The title of the sequel is The Rialto in Richmond Reconstructed, and then the subtitle is Confederates, Canada, and Carpetbaggers. Okay? So you will find the cover is very similar to the Rialto in Richmond, and the cover is up on Amazon. I posted a picture of it in the forum and on my Facebook page. All right, with that said, we need to get right down to business, because the business concerns a little bit in a roundabout way what the two Rialto and Richmond books have been about, namely money. Okay, and lots of it. This article was shared by PT with our thanks. And I want to read a few paragraphs from this and give you my really absurd, off the end of the twig, high-octane speculation about what it may all mean. The title of the piece is Federal Reserve Refuses to Provide Records of Foreign Gold Holdings. This is an article that appeared in March of last year by Ken Silva. But I want to read a couple of paragraphs here because I think they're relevant to what may be going on now. All right? So the article begins this way, quote, "The Federal Reserve's lack of transparency comes amidst reports that countries are removing their gold and other assets from the United States in the wake of the unprecedented Western sanctions imposed on Russia over its invasion of the Ukraine. According to a 2023 Invesco survey, a substantial percentage of central banks expressed concern about how the U.S. and its allies froze nearly half of Russia's 650 billion gold and forex reserves. Forex being, of course, foreign exchange. Then we get this, and this is really, for me, the center of attention in this article. And again, this article is from about a year ago, March of 2024. And listen to these two paragraphs. Quote, following Powell's evasive response, Headline USA filed a FOIA request with the Fed for records reflecting how much gold the Federal Reserve Bank of New York currently holds in its vault, as well as records reflecting the ownership stake that each of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's central bank government clients have in that gold. The FOIA request also sought records about the Fed's gold holdings prior to Russia's February 2022 invasion of the Ukraine. However, the Federal Reserve denied the FOIA request on Wednesday. Quote, board staff consulted with the staff at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, or the Reserve Bank, and have been advised that such records, if they exist, would be Reserve Bank records and consequently not subject to the board's rules regarding availability of information, close quote, the Fed said. And then the response of the congressman, I believe, that was examining and asking for these records says, quote, they're just passing the buck to the New York Fed. The Federal Reserve Bank could obtain the data from the New York Fed if they wanted to, and then could share it with you if it wanted to. The Fed chairman has already essentially told Representative Mooney that the Fed doesn't want to disclose the information, unquote, said Chris Powell, Secretary-Treasurer of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. So there you have it. An interesting little story. And the story is basically, you can't know how much of anybody's gold the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has in its vaults. Now, to a certain extent, I can readily understand the reason why, because the exact amounts of gold in the possession of any particular country would be a matter of their national security. So therefore, it would be most likely be classified extremely highly. And in addition to that, any information about it would only probably be an approximation, okay? In other words, the Reserve Bank of New York, which is the bank of deposit for the gold reserves, they shift the gold from one vault to another, according to the theory, anyway. The Reserve Bank of New York, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, is not going to give out information because that would be like your local bank giving out information to anyone who asked about it, about your own holdings and accounts and savings and certificates of deposit or whatever, you know, your safety deposit box. So in other words, it's understandable from that point of view. However, at the same time, there has to be some transparency about the amount of gold. Otherwise, you're opening the system up to massive amounts of fraud. If they can't be transparent about their gold holdings, then they could invent holdings that are higher according to their needs and wants. And by the way, the biggest thing they can do with that gold, while they're not talking about it to you, about how much they have, is they can rehypothecate it. They can create massive amounts of liquidity on a very narrow bullion basis. So I want to go back to Hjalmar Schacht in 1928. Hjalmar Schacht was the president of the German Reichsbank. He had been born in the United States to German parents. He himself emigrated back to Germany and became a German citizen and eventually president of the Reichsbank. And he remained president of the Reichsbank in Germany up until the first years of Adolf Hitler's government, I think about 1940, when he finally left the post. When in 1928 he went on a trip to New York City from Germany, he visited his old friend Strong, the governor of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and asked to go down into the gold vaults, which they did. And then once in the vaults, Schacht asked Strong, and he puts all of this in his memoirs, Schacht asked Strong to see the Reichsbank's gold. And this is an extraordinary episode, folks. You really have to fasten your mind around this. And the staff went looking for where the German Reichsbank's gold had been stored, and that implies, folks, that they kept records. Of course they did. But the staff came back and reported to Governor Strong and to Schacht that they simply could not find all of Germany's gold that was being held by the Federal Mars says. He kind of smiled at Strong and probably winked and said, "That's okay. I know you're good for it." So in other words, Schacht had something on the New York Federal Reserve. He had caught them red-handed as having probably intentionally misplaced Germany's gold. Which brings us forward to this story today and to what I think may be going on in this case. Because by this time last year, by March of 2024 last year, it was already becoming apparent to anybody with real eyes that could see and was not following the marching orders narrative being put out by the Western media that the Ukraine was just right around the corner from a decisive victory against Russia in this war. Everybody knew that it was losing the war and was going to lose. And that means that eventually some sort of peace deal had to be in the works. If you don't think that this began at that time, probably covertly, because of course the Biden administration was officially against any such idea and had prevented this from happening before. But there were probably already peace feelers out, and you could bet your bottom dollar that as part of those peace feelers that were going out, and probably part of the discussions that have recently occurred in Saudi Arabia between the United States and Russia, that the issue of Russia's frozen foreign exchange and gold bullion in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is probably one of the items at the top of the list for discussion. Now, here's why this article is important. The article is suggesting that European banks were pulling out their gold because they no longer, and other banks, because they no longer trusted the West to be above board and honest with their reporting. And who can blame them? Remember, a few years ago, Venezuela tried to get its gold back, repatriate its gold from the Bank of England vaults to Venezuela, and the Bank of England simply said, "No, we don't like your regime." So in other words, too bad. We're on top of your gold and we're going to keep it. Now here's what can happen. I suspect that what the sanctions did, and I hope everybody pays very close attention to this, because if Russia is requesting its gold reserves back, it would explain the sudden and recent influx of gold from Europe into the United States. Here's what I think went on. The sanctions, in effect, equal what the banks call the float. Okay? And for those of you who are old enough to remember, you probably had the experience of writing a check to somebody knowing that you had deposited enough money in your checking account to cover the check. And then you suddenly wake up 2 or 3 days later and the bank has sent you an overdraft notice in the mail that they've drafted your account $75 or whatever absurd amount to cover a check that supposedly didn't have enough money in it. Now, what happens, and what usually happened in those cases, was there's a period of time between when your check was deposited and when it cleared, and that's called the float. Now, obviously, in these days of quick electronic transfer, the float and the time of the float is much smaller, but it still exists. And in that time, depending on the policies of your bank and how they felt about you, they could either clear your check even though the money that you deposited itself had not cleared, but they could clear it on the basis that it probably was going to clear, or they could dock your account for an overdraft. So in other words, they used your money during the period of the float to make money for themselves. And the sanctions, I submit to you, are one gigantic example of the float. So here's what happened, I think, to all that Russian gold and foreign exchange that was in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's vaults. They used that money, they rehypothecated it, and used that money to make money for themselves. And now, all of a sudden, the sanctions regime may be over, and they've got to make good on the delivery of that gold and foreign exchange. Now, to rebuild the foreign exchange in the Russian reserves, well, you need a lot of gold to do it. And the other thing is, if you're going to deliver on a bunch of Russian gold that they suddenly may be wanting back, then you've got to have the gold to do it. So this is my crazy, wild, high-octane speculation about what may have been going on a year ago with the Federal Reserve and what may be going on behind the scenes right now during these peace talks. Now, it's high-octane speculation. I have no other evidence other than watching some of these trends and movements, but I strongly suspect that this is the case. And it has obvious implications for the story of all these bullion depositories that states in this country want to open up, because you'll notice that they want electronic transference of those gold deposits. And folks, I got to tell you, if you don't have physical media of exchange, you have a fraudulent system ready to go. And that's what's happening now. So if your state is considering these bullion depositories, write your state legislatures, your state senators, your state representatives, write them and tell them that they must, by law, mandate that papered certificates of deposit and specie coin can be used and must be accepted at any place of business, regardless of what their business policy about accepting cash may be. This is an absolute vital requirement. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in a cashless society, and behind the scenes, they are still going to deal in good old hard assets. And trust these people? No, sorry, I don't. So that's it for today's news and views from the Nefarium. Don't forget, we do have the vid chat tomorrow afternoon, late afternoon, 5 o'clock U.S. Central Time. Get your questions, comments in no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time tonight. Remember, the limit is 1 page per member. No additional comments. Please do not comment on other people's comments until after the vid chat. It just makes things more confusing for everybody. And remember, the Rialto in Richmond Reconstructed is now available for pre-order. You can do this at Adventures Unlimited, and I recommend doing it directly with the publisher if you're in a hurry to get your copy. That's it, everybody. We'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye, and God bless.